You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
If you're a fan of movies that are true stories, I've got a new podcast recommendation for you. It's called Based on a True Story, and it is the podcast that compares Hollywood with history. You'll learn from historians, authors, TV and film consultants, and sometimes even the real people the movies are based on as they separate fact from fiction in your favorite movies. Hear how much of the gangster movie Donnie Brasco happened from the real Donnie Brasco himself. Listen to the real history behind Downton Abbey from Lady Carnarvon. Laugh along with the real guys that the comedy movie Tag was based on. Get some extra stories from the production set from the historical consultant on the movie The Alamo. Those are just a few examples, so when you're ready to learn how much of your favorite movie really happened, subscribe to Based on a True Story in your podcast app of choice or find it at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Once again, that's basedonatruestorypodcast.com.
Hi, I'm Annie from Boston.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you are listening to your favorite international podcast. You just heard a promo for Based on a True Story hosted by Dan. His podcast is absolutely amazing. He talks about Hollywood movies and the real life events the movies are based on. I think that's up all our alleys, right?
Oh, yeah.
He also has really interesting guests on his show. But what's the best thing about his show? Dan won last year's People's Choice Podcast Award in the category History. And he's on the slate again this year in the same category, which means we are competing for the same category. Well, we told you we are up against some amazing podcasts, and Based on a True Story is one of them. So please go check them out.
Definitely. But vote for us. Listen to them, but vote
for us.
Vote for us. Okay. We love you. Sorry.
All right, back to Fresh Hell. In case you are new here, welcome. This is the podcast with two online friends who never met in real life and connect once a week through the magic of modern technology to talk about murder, mystery, and the macabre throughout history.
That's such a good tagline that you came up with. I love it. Yeah, that's right. So we started this podcast in 2019, before the plague times.
Jesus.
And we wouldn't be doing this, seriously, if it wasn't for all of you out there. We just have the best, most supportive listeners in the world. You voted for us in the podcast magazine Hot 50. You helped us reach my podcast goal of over 1,000 ratings in the United States on iTunes. And you helped us reach the finals once again in the People's Choice Podcast Awards for 2022. So thank you. We love you.
Yes, we are so grateful. Don't forget to check your emails, also your spam folder, in case you were randomly selected to vote on the final slate. The podcast awards will take place on 30th of September at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's 2 a.m. Central European Time, which means I'm gonna be so tired and sleepy, but okay. We will try to set up a watch party. We had one last year and it was really fun. And I think that's it. Everything is said and done for now.
Yeah.
And therefore, let's get into today's episode. Today, we want to tell you the very strange, very sad story of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos and Dr. Carl von Cosel. Some people hail this as one of the greatest love stories, but is it really? Is it? Is it though? Is it? We'll see.
So romantic. Yeah. I think the fact Johanna even asked that question gives you all a hint as to where we stand on that. This is a very disturbing episode. All right. So this takes place mostly in Key West in the 1930s and 1940s. And if you've listened to us for a long time, you probably already know that Key West is one of the places that Johanna and I have both been to, not together, like at the same time, but separately, years apart. But we both went there after we got married, which is a funny coincidence.
So funny. My husband and I got married on 3rd of December in Miami, and we went to Key West on 5th of December. And initially we had planned to stay for 2 or 3 nights, but ultimately we could only stay for 1 night because I found out that Brian Wilson and Al Jardine of the Beach Boys were playing in Fort Pierce on 6th of December, which is the complete opposite side. Well, the complete opposite direction. You have to go back to Miami and even further. So yeah, we only stayed 1 night, but I loved Key West. I loved the drive there. It was one of the most beautiful things I ever did. And I would love to do the run on the 7 Mile Bridge one day. It's on my bucket list.
Do you have a 7 Mile Bridge t-shirt?
No, I don't.
Okay, so Paul has one. There's like support this old 7 Mile Bridge, like to, preserve it. And I literally every couple of years have to order a new one for him because he just wears them to death. So I'll order you one too. And
yeah, I want one. Thank you. But I do hope to get back to Key West at one point to really spend more time there. We stayed at the Parrot Key. It was such a great hotel and villas. We had like a bungalow style.
Nice.
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. We had dinner at an amazing Peruvian restaurant. So yeah, I definitely want to go back.
Yeah, we were married at the end of October in St. Augustine, and then afterward we went to Key West, and we got there on Halloween night just after Fantasy Fest. Moose actually got us our Key West hotel, so that was her wedding present to us, which was amazing. I loved Hemingway House, the little white house. We've since taken my parents, both sets of in-laws. It was actually one of my mom's last trips for her and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary. Back down to Key West. We just love Key West. And Key West and the Florida Keys have a very, very rich and fascinating history. And of course, we can't get into too much detail, but you know us, so we got to give you at least a little bit of an overview on the history of the place. So for those of you who don't know the area of Florida that we're talking about, it's all the way at the bottom. If you listen to our episode on St. Augustine and the Haunted Lighthouse, then you already know about Ponce de Leon happening upon the land that would be called Florida while he was hunting for the Fountain of Youth. Key West was originally privately owned thanks to Spanish land grants, and the Spanish considered it to be North Cuba, which makes sense because Key West is closer to Cuba than it is to Miami. The name Key West comes from English-speaking settlers not understanding Spanish, basically. So the Spanish name was Cayo Hueso, which is Bone Island, and it's C-A-Y-O. And, we use the term C-A-Y, which is pronounced key, usually, but sometimes pronounced like K or Quay. But yeah, over time, Cayo Hueso became Key West. And the name Bone Island was maybe chosen because of the many skeletal remains of the indigenous people that were found by European settlers, but it could also be because of a rock formation that kind of looked like a bone. There were a few explanations. I'm going to go with the spookiest one. On March 5th, 1882, Lieutenant Commander Matthew C. Perry arrived on the schooner Shark, and he made his way to land and did that thing where he had like the flag and stabbed it into the island. And he was like, this belongs to the United States now. And everyone was like, okay. Like nobody cared. Like there were no protests. It was just like, fine, great. So that's how it became part of the United States. And it was a really, really good location. It had this natural, very deep water port. On February 1st, 1823, Groundhog Eve, the U.S. Navy gave orders to Commander Porter at Key West, and the order was to end piracy. And at that time, slave ships were also considered piracy. There are lots of stories of slave ships not only being prevented from reaching Cuba, but interestingly, I hadn't realized this, there were situations where the ship was sort of commandeered, taken back to Key West, and the African people on board were cared for, fed. The sick were given medicine and rest. Those who didn't survive were given a proper burial. And the people living in Key West at the time would donate anything that they could part with to help these men, women, and children regain their strength. And then they were returned back to Africa. I thought that was kind of interesting. I just didn't know that was a thing till I looked into this. Anyway. Also, wrecking. Wrecking was a huge part of the economy of Key West, and they were at risk for piracy. They were salvage operators that would recover wealth from the seafloor, right? All these sunken treasure ships. But they didn't just recover the wealth that was lost when these Spanish ships ran into the reef along the Keys. They would also go out and rescue crew and tow damaged vessels back that had hit the reef, and so they sort of became an early kind of Coast Guard. Previously, all salvage claims had to be brought up to St. Augustine, and St. Augustine is about 500 miles or a little over 800 kilometers north. So it was really convenient to have this port in Key West available. And so wrecking, salvage, as well as salt making and fishing, especially turtles and sponges, sea sponges, really helped make the town one of the wealthiest in the United States during the mid-1800s. During the American Civil War, again, really interesting. So Key West was in an odd position. They were part of Florida, so therefore part of the Confederacy. However, because Key West had that massive naval presence, a Union fort, Fort Zachary Taylor, was constructed, and Key West itself remained part of the Union. And it was actually a destination of salvation for people who had escaped enslavement. Also around this time was the 10 Years' War in Cuba, which caused an influx of refugees from Cuba. There was already a really healthy Bahamian population, and you're going to see in Key West the influence of both Cuba and the Bahamas in everything from architecture to what's on your restaurant menu. It's great. In 1912, Henry Flagler, the railroad magnate who built beautiful, luxurious Gilded Age hotels in St. Augustine, he constructed the Overseas Railway, which was 128 miles or 205 kilometers from mainland Florida, and this really made the Florida Keys open to tourism. In 1927, Pan Am, so Pan American Airways, was founded in Key West, and the first flight was to Cuba. The first flight is actually the name of a restaurant. It's really charming. It's a restaurant and brewery on Whitehead Street, and it's where the original Pan Am offices used to be. So tourism flourished, and much like Provincetown, the island became popular with artists. Probably the most famous would be Tennessee Williams, who wrote A Streetcar Named Desire in Key West, and of course Ernest Hemingway, whose house you can tour but don't touch anything. It is absolutely full of Hemingway cats, those polydactyly, extra-toed cats everywhere. Did you go to Hemingway House when you were...
No, unfortunately we didn't have time. We arrived there around a little bit after noon and just stayed until early next morning. So we really just walked around the city a little bit, well, the town, and had a nice dinner, and that's it, unfortunately.
Well, we'll have to go back.
Yeah.
It's great because it's open to the public, and it's really funny because the cats, it's like do not touch because it's all original furniture and everything. And it just makes you laugh because there'll be like a bed and it'll say do not touch. And then in the middle of the bed is a cat who's like clawing the shit out of the coverlet, just tearing it to shreds. It's like, don't touch. It's the cats. But it's awesome. And when they've had hurricanes, actually, the people who volunteer and work at Hemingway House, they stay with the cats.
And they're all descendants from Hemingway's. What was the name of the cat? Snowball, I think?
I think it was Snowball, who was given to him by a ship's captain, right? But they say that all the extra-toed cats come down from that one cat. Yeah. I love them. I love those feet. So that's definitely worth a visit, as is Truman's Little White House. That was the naval station headquarters down there. And Truman went down so frequently and just loved it that it's called Truman's Little White House, and it's been perfectly preserved. You'd love it, Johanna. It's like walking back in time. You'd love it. We got to go back to Key West. All right. Last thing of note that I thought some of you would find funny. In 1982, U.S. Border Patrol set up roadblocks all along at the Overseas Highway. They were trying to catch drug smugglers. And this completely fucked up the traffic to the point that the people in Key West decided to secede from the United States and called themselves the Conch Republic. I mean, they didn't obviously really, but that protest stuck. And you will see Key West referred to today as the Conch Republic. So, yeah, we're definitely gonna... One of these days, we're going to have a macabre travel component to our podcast, and Key West it's right there at the top of the destinations. But yeah, right back to the early 20th century. Okay. So in the 1920s, Key West was more and more popular with tourists, and they decided to stay in town and not just use it as a port to get to Cuba and the Bahamas more easily, right? We found this great article from the Miami Herald from the 21st of April, 1929, and I'm going to read you an excerpt just to get you into the right mindset, get you on island time, Quote, Key West has appeal as foreign center. Southernmost city of the United States is attractive because it's different. by Earl R. Adams, staff correspondent for the Herald. Key West, Florida, April 20. The American tourists are discovering Key West. For years, Key West, the most foreign city in the United States, situated on a coral island at the extreme tip of the Florida mainland, has been known merely as the jumping-off place for tourists going and coming from Cuba. In recent years, however, Key West has come into her own as a tourist attraction and bids fair to become one of the most important resorts cities in this playground state. Key West has truly a Latin American atmosphere. The quaint homes, the brilliant flowers that bloom the year round, the abundant fruits, many of these strange to the visitor, are aspects that engage the steadfast attention of all tourists that linger here. It's a dreamy paradise, this most important of the vast chain of Florida keys, whose resemblance to exotic shores is more than merely a creation of the imagination. This picturesque region of historic America is as colorful and mysterious above the sea as it is beneath. It is a great military post. It is the southernmost city in the United States. It is the logical gateway to the Panama Canal. It is a fisherman's paradise, and it was a stronghold of the pirates when those bloodthirsty buccaneers roved the Caribbean. Just off the southern tip of this picturesque seagoing city, the mighty waters of the Gulf Stream and the opalescent Atlantic meet. There, the giant liners pass in a constant stream on their ways to and from Europe. It is a little-known fact that Key West ranks next to New York in the number of passengers arriving from foreign ports, and that her imports last year were $4,775,702 against exports of $36,015,735.
That's a lot of horse money.
That's a lot.
That's a lot
of horse money. Yeah. Key West's exports were more than 1/2 greater than the combined exports of all other Florida ports. So if you think about that for a minute and how big of a state Florida is and how many, right? Continuing on, quote, daily steamship passenger service is maintained with Havana, and there are 2 sailings weekly for Port Tampa. Passenger service with New York and Galveston is also maintained, as well as freight service. Giant railroad car ferries are operated daily between this port and Havana, and the Florida East Coast Railway Company stores here all fuel consumed by that company's locomotives. This oil arrives in giant oil tankers from Mexico and Texas. The Porter Dock Company also serves large tankers and freighters, and the Texas Oil Company has a terminal here. Key West is also the headquarters for the 7th Lighthouse District, and the naval station is one of the most important on the entire Atlantic seaboard. End quote.
I think we can all imagine how busy the port of this otherwise very tranquil place must have felt. Ships were coming and going. Passengers would arrive daily, as you heard. And one of these passengers was Dr. Carl von Cosel. Dr. von Cosel's actual name was Georg Carl Tanzler, and he was born in Dresden on 8th of February, 1877. And little is known about his early life, and the little we do know is mostly from his autobiography. And for reasons you will soon know, I wouldn't really trust him too much. Let's say it like this. I have a feeling that in German we would say, nimmt es mit der Wahrheit nicht so genau, which literally translates to, he isn't too exact when it comes to the truth. But I think a more elegant phrasing might be, he has a somewhat elastic relationship with the truth.
Yeah.
So he was born at a time when Dresden was part of Prussia. Dresden, just like Key West, has a very interesting, often sad and very lively history. We talked a little bit about Prussia and the military culture in our episode about the Hauptmann von Köpenick. And in his autobiography named The Secret of Eleanor's Tomb, he claims that he is the descendant of a noble family, the von Cosels, and that he grew up in a townhouse they had named the castle, and also in a manor in the countryside. And there, in this manor, he started to become interested in all kinds of things, for example, flying. He claimed to have constructed glider planes, 2 hot air balloons made from Japanese silk, of course. He said he also built a high-voltage laboratory. And, all his stories from his past sounds like a mix of Baron Münchhausen and Dr. Frankenstein, in a way.
Right.
Of course, there exists a noble family von Cosel, but there's absolutely no proof that Georg Karl was a von Cosel. And there's also Anna Constantia von Cosel. She's not related to the von Cosel noble family. She was the most famous mistress of August the Strong, who was the Elector of Saxony and the King of Poland at one point. And Anna Constantia will make another appearance in a little while. But let's talk a little bit more about Georg Carl Tanzler's past. So sometime before World War I, Georg Carl Tanzler, who was now in his 30s, found himself on his way to India and then on to Australia. So, according to his autobiography, or his autobiographical account that was titled The Trial Bay Organ, a Product of Wit and Ingenuity, he claims that he found himself in Australia where he was trying to gather equipment for a planned trip to the South Sea. Kind of got sidetracked, I know the feeling, and he started to be interested in constructing boats. He bought some property, apparently he owned a whole island. He owned boats and an organ because he also liked to build organs from scratch. He stayed in Australia for nearly 10 years and he was just about to design and construct a trans-ocean flyer when World War I broke out and Georg Carl Tanzler was placed in a camp in Trial Bay, where he was prisoner of war. Because he was German. He then tried to build a secret sailboat to flee Australia. And when I read that, I literally rolled my eyes. Because honestly, it sounded first of all a lot like Papillon. And I don't trust anything this man says.
No.
But then, to my surprise, I read that he had a witness who supported his claims. This witness is Anton Walter Florus Güth, a fellow German and one of the first Western Europeans who became a fully ordained Buddhist monk. And then he went by the name Nyanatiloka Mahatera. I hope I did pronounce that correctly.
Yeah, I think sounds right.
He had spent the beginning of World War I in another British colony, Sri Lanka. And in 1915, he too was deported and interned at Trial Bay, located right between Sydney and Brisbane. And in his memoirs, the Buddhist monk talks about his plan to flee with a man named Count von Cosel on a sailboat. So, to my surprise, it seems to be true that Tanzler was in Australia at the time, that he had been held at Trial Bay. His claims about the sailboat, his claims about owning an island, about building a trans-ocean flyer, I have my doubts, let's say it like this. After the war, Tanzler returned to Germany, where he was reunited with his mother and younger sister. His father had passed away in 1912. In 1920, he got married to Doris Schäfer, and the couple has 2 children. The first daughter was born in 1922 and named Ayesha, which is Ayesha. It's a beautiful, but very unusual name for a German child in the 1920s. It's an Arabian name and it means alive. It is also the name of the Prophet Muhammad's 3rd wife. I don't know, I just found it very interesting, and I would love to know why they chose this name. Their second child, who was another daughter, was born 2 years later. Her name was Clarista, which is also a bit unusual. It comes from the Latin word clarus, but the more common names from that word would be Clara or Clarissa. I take it they had a love for beautiful and unique names. It's really not that important, I just found it interesting, and now you can forget all about it. But let me just add that Clarista was also called Christa, and later, after the family moved to Florida, she went by Crystal. Unfortunately, she was not granted to live a long life. She passed away in 1934 at the age of 10, and she is buried in Florida. Okay, so the young family lives in Germany in those years between the world wars. And of course, they don't know that. Carl's mother suggests that he and his family should move to the US, just like his sister had done a couple of years ago, and she could surely help them to settle in and start a new life over there. And so in 1926, Georg Carl Tanzler travels to Rotterdam and from there to Cuba and on to Florida, where his sister lived. I said before, he was one of the people who arrived on a steamboat from Havana, and then he made his way to Sapphire Hills, which is 48 kilometers or 30 miles northeast of Tampa. Because that's where his sister lived, and a little while later, his wife and daughters joined him in Sapphire Hills.
Sapphire Hills is known for their spring water. They have a freshwater spring there, and sell bottled water. You can find it all over the state of Florida. All right, so the Young family, they wouldn't be living together for a very long time. In 1927, Dr. Carl von Cosel, which is now how he had started calling himself, he accepted a position as a radiology technician at the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West. So that's great. We should mention that just like there's no source or proof that Carl was the descendant of a noble family and account, this is, I guess, I would say more important because there's also no source or proof of him actually being a doctor. Can you just imagine, like, today going to see someone for treatment and then learning they weren't even a doctor?
I always have to think of Dr. Death, and
yes.
He was a real doctor, so...
I know. Ugh. But, this was also the good old days where you could more easily change your identity or claim to be someone or something that you're not. I mean, it's still possible today. It's just much, much more difficult, right?
Yeah, and people were definitely... I mean, aside from the paper trail that wasn't there and the online presence that wasn't there, people were also more trusting back then, especially when it was about a figure of authority. And he was a German count and a doctor. A German doctor must be a good person.
So Carl von Cosel, he's now working as a radiologist in Key West, which sounds pretty nice, to be honest.
Could be worse.
Yeah. But before we talk about what happened next, we need to talk about what happened a long time ago, because before Carl had moved to Florida, Johanna mentioned her before, Anna Constantia von Cosel, who had lived from 1680 to 1765 and was the main mistress of Augustus the Strong. And Carl von Cosel claimed that she was his great-great-aunt. Great-great-great-great-great-great-aunt Anna, and her spirit haunted the countryside manor that he had grown up in. So he later insisted that Constantia von Cosel's ghost had tried to get his attention for a long time, mostly by moving stuff around, setting curtains on fire with a fire that couldn't burn you, and at one time lifting an entire solid oak table high in the air. All the things your average ghost would do, But he was never scared of her.
That's not a problem at all.
It's not. Listen,
it's fine.
I appreciate that the flames aren't going to burn anybody.
It's like the meme. It's fine. This is fine.
This is all fine. All of this is fine. You're just sitting around the table and you're fucking 6 feet in the air all of a sudden. It's great. No problem. Thanks, Auntie. But he says no, it's fine. He was never scared of her. He was just kind of scared of being maybe crushed accidentally by the oak table. But other than that, no, it was good. It was all fine. No problem. He just always felt like she was trying to tell him something. But what? What could it be? Then one night, wouldn't you know, he woke up and saw 2 women standing next to his bed. One was obviously the ghost of Constantia, and the other was a beautiful young pale woman with dark eyes. Constantia told Carl that this is his future bride, and that at some point he will find her. Then a couple of years later, during his traveling years, he's in Italy and he sees a statue of a woman, and it looks identical to the young woman that Constantia had shown him. While looking at the statue, he reads an inscription, and it says that her name is Elena. And suddenly, bear with me, she becomes alive, stepped down off the pedestal, and walked past him. That's a thing that happened.
All the time.
All the time.
And he's still not shocked about it. He's just like, okay.
Yeah, these were the signs I was given. First, I woke up with women next to my bed. Then I met this statue who turned into a real person and then walked away. And then the third time he encounters the ghost, which is what he calls her, it happened when he was living in Australia. And this time the ghost just spent a week with him before vanishing. But she never said a word.
Yeah, it was just like...
he
came home from work, she was there, he had dinner, she was there, she was just there.
Yeah, just a full body apparition floating around your place with you for a week, and then poof, gone on day 7. It's fine. It's totally normal. All right, so I think we don't need to say that Carl von Cosel claimed all of this after the fact. After what we're going to tell you about. So it does kind of make it sound like justifying what he was going to do. You decide. All right. It's 1930, and he's working in the Marine Hospital in Key West as a radiologist and a pathologist. And on the 22nd of April, 1930, he is called to a patient to draw some blood samples. The patient is a beautiful young woman named Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos. She is 20 years old and the daughter of Cuban immigrants. When Carl enters the room and sees her, he immediately recognizes her as the young woman of his dreams. And wouldn't you know it, even the name is a match. So lucky that he finds his promised bride in this young, beautiful woman who's only 33 years younger than him.
I mean, who cares that he already has a wife?
It doesn't. No, this is
destiny.
This was foretold. And he finds her to be so beautiful, so perfect, that he doesn't want to draw blood from her earlobe, because that's where they used to take blood from back then. He didn't want to ruin her beautiful, perfect ear, so instead he pricks her finger. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Elena and her family, the victims here. Elena was born on 31st of July, 1909, to Francisco Hoyos, who was a local cigar maker, and Aurora Milagro. She also had two sisters. Florinda was 3 years older than Elena, and Celia was 4 years younger. Elena was indeed very good-looking and hailed as a local beauty throughout Key West. In 1926, the then 17-year-old married 18-year-old Luis Mesa, but the couple separated after a miscarriage. Luis moved to Miami and lived with another woman. Elena and Luis, however, they never did get officially divorced. So it's 1930, Elena is living with her parents again, and her mother had taken her to the Marine Hospital to be examined. After the blood sample was taken, the very next day, Elena was back at the hospital for an X-ray where it became clear that she was suffering from tuberculosis.
If you are a person who reads old novels or reads historical biographies, or watches movies based on old novels or based on old historical biographies, you will know tuberculosis, or consumption, how it was often called, and that it was a huge problem. And I think based on these literary examples that we have, we can all picture, pale young men, pale young women lying on ottomans, coughing blood in very delicate white handkerchiefs. Mm-hmm. And tuberculosis really was, and honestly still is, a huge problem. From Annie's favorite source, to quote Wikipedia, here's a brief description of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, also called TB, is an infectious disease usually caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria. Tuberculosis generally affects the lungs, but it can also affect other parts of the body. Most infections show no symptoms, in which case it is known as latent tuberculosis. Around 10% of latent infections progress to active disease, which, if left untreated, kill about half of those affected.
That's a huge number of people.
Yep.
Like, for half of people who develop active disease to die that's...
If untreated, yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
Typical symptoms of active TB are chronic cough with blood-containing mucus, fever, night sweats, and weight loss. It was historically referred to as consumption due to the weight loss associated with the disease. Infection of other organs can cause a wide range of symptoms. Tuberculosis is spread from one person to the next through the air when people who have active TB in their lungs cough, spit, speak, or sneeze. People with latent TB do not spread the disease. In 2018, 1/4 of the world's population was thought to have a latent infection of TB, which is wild. I mean, think about that. New infections occur in about 1% of the population each year. In 2020, an estimated 10 million people developed active TB, resulting in 1.5 million deaths, making it the second leading cause of death from an infectious disease after COVID-19. End quote. Nowadays, tuberculosis can be treated, but it is a very serious disease and treatment still takes a long time. And if untreated, as we said, it will most likely be fatal. Also, if your immune system is already weak due to other health issues, like cancer, HIV, treatment of tuberculosis is much harder.
Yeah, I actually have to get tuberculosis testing pretty regularly because of the meds that I take for autoimmune disease. Yeah, I know there's a few countries too that I can never visit because the tuberculosis rates are it's too risky, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Interestingly, I do wonder whether Elena's miscarriage was tuberculosis, because that was a really common problem with women who had it. Call the Midwife did a whole storyline about that. Anyway, it's just, I think, important to remember it's not an old-timey disease that we've wiped out. It's still around. And
could the miscarriage also be connected to the tuberculosis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because you could get it. There's a whole thing about it in Call the Midwife about a patient who has it in their uterus or ovaries. Like, the disease can go in, like you said, in other organs, and it would get into women's reproductive organs. So that's really sad if she had, because it almost sounds like her husband left her because she had a miscarriage and, started a life with someone who could give him children. So you just feel sorry for her going through all of that.
She was so young.
So young.
So up until the 1940s, though, there was not too much they could do to treat tuberculosis. They tried things like very invasive surgeries on the lungs, which, didn't help a whole lot.
No.
The mortality was still very high. John F. Murray, Dean Schraufnagel, and Philip C. Hopewell say this in their text called Treatment of Tuberculosis, a Historical Perspective. Quote, "Of all achievements in medicine, the successful treatment of tuberculosis has had one of the greatest impacts on society. Tuberculosis was a leading cause of disease and a mortal enemy of humanity for millennia. The first step in finding a cure was the discovery of the cause of tuberculosis by Robert Koch in 1882. The sanatorium movement that began shortly afterwards in Europe and soon spread to the United States brought attention to the plight of afflicted persons and catalyzed public health action. The anti-tuberculosis benefit of streptomycin was announced in 1945, although application was limited by the rapid development of resistance. Para-aminosalicylic acid, also discovered in 1945, when combined with streptomycin, was found to greatly reduce the occurrence of drug resistance." End quote. And there were other developments in the 50s and 60s, and I think the first real good treatment plan came to be in the 1970s, right?
Yep. I think so.
Doesn't matter too much because we are in the 1930s, and Carl von Cosel had just discovered that the young woman he obsessed with is suffering from a disease that will most likely kill her. And of course, he's now trying everything to heal her, and Elena's mother realizes that this German doctor shows a lot of interest in her daughter's case, and she's quite happy about it at first. And why wouldn't she be? Because her daughter needs help, the family was a working-class family, and treatment was expensive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure that initially Carl was just a godsend to the family, right? If you have an ill family member and there's suddenly somebody, that you think has medical knowledge and can help them.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. The mother invites the doctor over to the house, and from then on, he's a really regular guest. He comes pretty much daily to look after Elena. And again, all the following treatments are from his recollection, and there's no way to know what's true and what isn't. I don't know. There's not a lot of information on it outside his own recollections. Some of it sounds like outright lies, but we'll see what he said and how he tried to treat Elena. So he started with radiation therapy on her. He purchased expensive electric equipment that he had delivered to their house. This is what he wrote about in his book. Quote, "I had already prepared to give her high-frequency violet ray treatment in her own house. Since I could not use hospital equipment for the purpose, I had built by my own hands a high-voltage transformer for her and had brought another instrument from the Betts Company in Indiana for her use. But when on my next visit I proposed to have this apparatus installed at my expense, of course, the whole family turned against me. I was bluntly informed that my services were no longer required. I was accused of painting far too black a picture of Elena's health. It was hinted that she was making much better progress with the aid of patent medicines, and that all of this newfangled electrical apparatus was the devil's work. For the past 9 months now, I had overworked. My day belonged to the hospital, my evenings to Elena, my nights to work on the airship and on the 1,000,000-volt transformer for Elena." End quote. Okay, so couple of things, just real quick. The airship he mentions that he worked on, he promised Elena that he was going to heal her and then he was going to take her on his plane and travels to the South Seas with her. And the 1,000,000-volt transformer,
I mean, I can't.
I don't understand what he thought anyhow. In the end, he couldn't use it to cure her. His excuse was that the foundations of the house were not strong enough to take the weight of the transformer. Oh, and also Elena's dad was like, how much is that? Like he pulled the classic dad move, right? He's like, what's that going to do to our electric bill?
It's true.
Like 1 million volts? Is that really necessary?
Would you want to be treated with a 1 million volt transformer? I don't think so.
Wouldn't you just be cooked? Like, wouldn't you just be
I can understand why they went to a real practitioners, real doctors. And they were like, thanks, we're all set.
Yeah. We're just going to stick with this concoction of arsenic and morphine that we got from the drugstore down the road. It's fine. I mean, what were you going to do? It was all equally useless, right? So Carl said, oh, don't worry, I'll pay for it. Like, he was very generous. He showered Elena with daily gifts, everything from fruit, which was a gift back then, to jewelry. He asked her to marry him a bunch of times, but every time she was like, nope, pass, hard pass. Good day, sir. She just felt like he was too old for her. And her sister Florinda later stated that she was very kind to him because he was kind to her and because she was raised to be kind to everybody, but that she saw him as a grandfather figure and she was definitely not in love with him. And I think we definitely agree that that was, in fact, the truth, right? Okay. So after a while, Elena and her family, so it looks like they started to get a little bit suspicious about the efficacy of these treatments and also maybe a little creeped out by this doctor. Because if he wasn't home, he would send notes like this, quote, "My darling Elena, please don't deceive yourself that all is well, even if you feel that way. Don't throw caution to the wind. Your enemy is an invisible one. He can only be seen by trained, scientific eyes, and he can only be fought in a scientific manner. Please, darling, do not listen to irresponsible advice. I know there are quacks around who are suggesting all kinds of magic cures which have their common source in ignorance. Take the medicine I am sending and do come back to the hospital for a new checkup. Dr. Lombard, too, wants to see you. I am working on our airplane in my spare time. It is now nearly completed, and the next time you come, I will give you the key for the cabin and we shall officially christen it. And then, too, I am already collecting all the things we are going to need on our wedding trip. Silk dresses for you and a bridal gown which is all white silk, and all the rest of your trousseau, even lingerie, and silver slippers, and last but not least, all of your medicines, like chinosol and adrenaline, glucose, beef extract, and all the rest of it. Forever yours, Carl." So
romantic. The beef extract especially.
I love it when a man offers me beef extract. I just love how he starts out with, like, don't deceive yourself. You're not okay. You're definitely dying.
But hey, I'm building an airplane and it's all gonna be good.
But yeah, we're gonna get you some pretty dresses. Honestly. So several times now, the family has had to send Carl away. They're like, get out. They even start to consult other doctors. And at one point, the family moved to another house without telling Carl to try to get away from him. And they told all the neighbors, like, don't tell the German doctor where we are, which I think that says a lot, doesn't it? Like,
so
you don't
much.
move to get away from somebody, right? It's a small town, though, Key West. So what does Carl do? He does what any respectable man of science would do. He waits till nightfall, then he creeps around Key West, peeping into houses, trying to find Elena again. Because that's fine. That is normal and not in any way creepy or disturbing.
So once more we have a huge red flag parade. Yay! Unfortunately, at one point, one former neighbor does take Carl von Cosel to Elena's new home, but when he finds her, she's already really weakened by illness, and on 25th of October 1931, Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos dies of tuberculosis, and she's only 22 years old. The following is Florinda's recollection, printed in an article in the Miami Herald on 21st of October 1940. Quote, "On the day Elena died, he arrived at the house shortly after her death. He had an ultraviolet ray machine, which he used on her for a few minutes before our family physician arrived and pronounced Elena dead. He desired to continue working on the body, insisting he could restore life, but my father refused. After Elena's death, On his urgent request, we rented him the room that she had occupied for $5 a month. We had to furnish him with tea, toast, scrambled eggs, and fish for this small payment, and he never did pay us promptly." End quote. So, even after her death, Carl would keep bothering Elena's family, and now he was even squatting in her former room. He was sleeping in her former bed, and he had her family make him meals.
Yeah.
I mean, they stayed kind with him and friendly because he offered to build a mausoleum for the young woman because he feared that a normal grave could be flooded through the rain. He even has the audacity to put his own name on the plaque of the mausoleum. And you'd think that this is where the story ends, but it's not. Far from it.
Oh no, it gets so much worse.
Okay, so now Elena is resting in this white mausoleum. Dr. Cosel called it Elena's little house. And her body is of course embalmed, and Dr. Cosel sits in there with her casket or sarcophagus, and he talks to her. Every night. Every night he would sit in there with his bride. He even describes how her funeral felt like their wedding to him. And he would be talking and talking and talking. And at one point, Elena starts to reply. She starts singing Spanish songs to him, and then she tells him she wants to live with him and that he should take her away from the mausoleum. And so he comes to a conclusion. One night in April of 1933, he opens up the casket and he takes Elena's body with him. And of course the body has already started to decay, but Carl was determined to fix Elena. He replaced the eyes with glass eyes, and he covered her body in silk strips that he had drenched in plaster of Paris and wax. And he made a wig out of Elena's own hair that her mother had kept after Elena had cut her hair into a bob sometime before she died. I really wonder how he got a hold of the hair.
I'm guessing he stole it from the house. I'm guessing he just straight up stole it, yeah.
And he dressed her, he put jewelry on her, he bathed her body in perfume. And we have to mention that some of the sources also do note that he constructed a tube, which he inserted into her body, and this allowed him to have intercourse with the corpse, to consummate the marriage, which they had a marriage. Well, he had kind of a secret ceremony, marriage, wedding, whatever you want to call that, right?
Mm.
That's how Dr. Carl von Cosel lived for the next 7 years. He would sleep in one bed with Elena's body. He would have meals with her, he would dance with her, and of course he tried to find a way to bring her back to life. After all, he had been experimenting with strong electrical currencies for decades already. And Elena's family, well, at that point, I think it was only her sister Florinda who was left because everybody else had died, most of them from tuberculosis as well. And Florinda had no idea what was going on all those years. She thinks Elena's body is still resting in the mausoleum. But after 7 years, in October of 1940, Florinda started to hear some rumors that something weird was going on at the doctor's house. And I think what happened was that someone saw him dancing with the mummified body through the window.
Mm.
And so Elena's older sister Florinda decides to investigate. And so she goes to the doctor's house and she rings the doorbell. And Dr. Carl von Cosel opens the door, and then, like it's just the most natural and normal thing in the world, he looks above his shoulder and he says, "Darling, your sister's here."
Yeah.
Can you even imagine?
Chills.
Like the horror.
No.
Florinda, of course, she was in utter shock when she realized what Carl von Cosel had done to her sister's body, but she told him that she would not report him if only he would hand over Elena's body so that she could be placed to rest again. He refused. So Florinda notified the authorities and Carl von Cosel was arrested, and on 9th of October 1940, Elena's body was put on display in a Key West funeral home, and thousands of people stood in line to catch a glimpse of the mummified body. Some schools even sent the students home early that day so that they could go and see Elena.
Can you imagine today? Can you imagine if there was a necrophiliac case today?
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, she's going to be on display at the Museum of Science. Take your kids. Different time, but yeah.
Well, they all look at her, and then her body was placed to rest in an unmarked grave out of fear that either Carl von Cosel or some looky-loos would disturb her peace once more. And I think that was a really smart move.
Oh, he absolutely would have dug her up again if he knew where she was.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, I know a lot of you are wondering, and there are photos. Yeah. So, Dr. Cosel was in jail, but would he be punished? Well, first of all, he was examined and declared mentally competent and able to stand trial on the charges of, quote, wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization, end quote. However, the case was dropped soon after as the statute of limitations had expired.
I find it so interesting that necrophilia wasn't even mentioned. Like, that was completely dropped. Like, didn't happen.
Yeah, right. Because they talk about maliciously destroying a grave, but they don't talk about what was done to her body.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe there weren't laws yet for that. Like, maybe this is partly why they had to add laws. You know? I don't know. Well, in any case, the other thing that's really weird, and another reason why probably there wasn't much done prosecutorially, that the public was just, they were very much in favor of the German doctor. Many, many people saw this whole thing as a love story, just a crazy love story, and the doctor fell deeply in love with his patient and couldn't save her, but still wanted to be with her forever. So romantic. Some people even thought that her body should be given back to him, which...
Imagine how the sister must feel if she hears that.
Yeah, she was horrified. Florinda felt that this was one of the world's most horrendous crimes. And in terms of abuse of a corpse, I absolutely see her point. It's a weird case because you want to say abuse of a corpse or this or that, but in his mind, everything he was doing was for loving purposes. It's just amazing to me how many people agreed with him.
Yeah, that's this kind of toxic relationships that had been fed to us through media, through movies and books.
Forever.
Yeah, and we think these toxic relationships, that's romantic.
Right.
Like the man has to fight for the woman.
Or Romeo and Juliet. That's not romantic. There's nothing romantic about Romeo and Juliet.
It's really sad and disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, though, also, the newspapers at the time, they didn't report all the details. I think if people knew that he was being intimate with the corpse, and I think their opinions would have changed pretty quickly. And also, I don't think they knew about all the creepy stalker behavior. It's only recently that this kind of behavior is starting to change, right? Like, even when we were growing up, there was this pervasive feeling that if you liked a woman or a man and they said no, they weren't interested, just keep trying.
Yeah.
Just keep asking.
You can change their mind.
Asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. They'll like you eventually. And it was a really normal thing when we were young. I think it's thankfully less common now.
I think it's slowly changing, yeah.
It is changing.
And honestly, peeping into houses in the middle of the night is never good. Don't.
Never. Don't do it. It's awful. It's awful. So, yeah. After all was said and done, Carl von Cosel, he left Key West. And where did he go? Back to Zephyr Hills and to a house that was close to where his wife, Doris, lived. Yep. That's right. Carl was still married to Doris, and apparently his last years were his wife taking care of him. Poor Doris.
Seriously.
Yeah, right? Also, during the media frenzy, Carl von Cosel had claimed that he hadn't heard from his wife Doris in over 11 years, and he thought that she had filed for and was granted a divorce. But this is another lie. Doris regularly sent postcards, letters, and packages to her husband while he was in Key West. So, yeah. But that's not it. We're still not at the end of the story. Carl was still obsessed with poor Elena, and he still had a death mask that he had made after Elena had died. And with that death mask, he created yet another life-size doll that looked like Elena. And he lived with this doll until he passed away on the 3rd of July, 1952, at the age of 75. His body was not found immediately, but was rather found 3 weeks later, lying on the floor of his home in Zephyr Hills. There is some lore that he was found dead, tightly holding on to his doll, but we don't know if that's true. It's probably not. Could be. And also, there's more lore that says when the doll was examined, they found that it contained human bones, which were, of course, the bones of Elena, and that he had paid a gravedigger to tell him where she was buried, and then he went and dug her bones up again to take them with him. We couldn't really find a source that we trusted for this claim, and I think both of us, we both doubt it, right? I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if it was true, because...
I wouldn't put it beyond him. Like, he would totally do that, but I don't think that he had the opportunity. I mean, who knows, but...
And there's another bit of cringeworthy... there's another cringeworthy claim we're a little bit iffy on, which is that he was buried with the second doll that he created. I
mean, it could only be either or, right? I mean, if he was buried with the doll, then they wouldn't know that it contained bones, I guess. And if he wasn't buried, then I think it's all just there to make it even creepier and more... I agree.
Yeah, it's already a disturbing enough story. You don't have to add more creepiness to it. Yeah. So in the 1980s, the house that Carl had lived in was renovated, and construction workers, they claimed they had found a note written by Carl that confessed to Elena's murder. The note stated that he had poisoned her in order to end her suffering. And of course, there are some who believe that he might have murdered her because she had refused to marry him, but I don't know.
Again, I can see that, you know. I don't know if that note exists or if it exists, if it was written by him. But again, it's something that I wouldn't put behind him or beyond him to murder Elena. But I could also see his quack methods playing a part in her death accidentally.
Right? Yes. Nothing he was doing was going to help.
The whole radiation, he kept radiating her so much.
There's nothing I'd put past Carl, I don't think. He was obviously, very deeply mentally ill. He had delusions of every sort, but his obsession with Elena was just the epitome of legend. It's...
I don't know, I can't get over the fact that he was declared mentally sane, right?
Is it because, do you think it's because I think certain things, like when the sister shows up and he's just blatantly like, honey, your sister's here, like, that's not sane. That's not sane at all. But then, clearly, on some level, he was hiding things, wasn't he? I mean, he hid a lot of things, so he was sane enough to put up a front, right?
It's such a weird case, and I mean, it's also interesting. Florinda stated in the same article that was mentioned before, from the Miami Herald on 21st of October 1940, quote, "Von Cosel is guilty of a most heinous crime. He should be put away. Would a sane man sleep beside an effigy for 7 years? Why is it that the doctors who examined the wax image did not make public their findings? I understand that the 2 doctors who declared him sane later examined the body. I wonder if the opinion is the same since the thorough examination of the body." End quote. And I think she's kind of hinting on the necrophiliac part here that was only...
Exactly.
Like, the first time I think they publicly talked about this tube thing, this apparatus, was in some article from the 1970s, so that's why, again, it's not really clear if that is fact or fiction, but I think the sister is hinting here.
I think it's fact only because I think that's exactly what she's talking about. I think,
and it's also something that he would do, let's be honest. I mean... Of course,
yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. That's the very sad, very weird story of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos and Carl Tanzler, also known as Dr. Carl von Cosel. So romantic.
So romantic.
I hate these kind of things that are viewed as romance when it's clearly like, no, that's not healthy. That's not good.
No.
She moved houses. The whole family moved to get away from him. Yeah. That's not romantic.
No. There's nothing romantic about that at all. It's just sad. I imagine her being just a very young, beautiful young woman. I imagine her first husband having left her and gone off with somebody who could give him babies. She probably couldn't because of the tuberculosis. I doubt that he intentionally killed her. I don't think that was part of anything. I do think that he was sincerely trying to keep her alive for as long as possible, but, he was going to make do with whatever he had, and...
I can't get over the 1,000,000-volt
It's too many volts.
Like, it's too many.
It's just... Whew. Yeah. I mean, that I would imagine that would be more of like a reanimation attempt with that many volts.
There's a million volts. I don't know. It's been a decade since I went to university and had like electromechanics.
Do you think someone's going to write to us and be like, 1 million volts is approximately what your hair straightener uses or something like... They might. We're not electricians. Listen, 1 million is definitely too much. We've done the research and we're telling you now it's too much.
You can see that this is not our area of expertise here.
We're not scientists, no, but we never claimed to be, so I think that's all right. I don't know. I think everybody's going to be thinking about this one for a while. It's just there are a lot of layers to this story. Yeah. All right, something good?
Something good. My something good is key lime pie.
Nice.
Easy, quick, I love it. I need to see, because I can't get key limes here for obvious reasons. I know that you can do it with other limes, but is it really the same? And now I'm thinking maybe I can get like canned key lime juice, maybe, and make key lime pie.
I can get it in bottles, but I don't know if I can mail that much of a liquid.
You already mailed me one time, you remember?
Yeah, I did.
Secretly.
I think you can use regular lime and it'll be okay.
Yeah.
I love key lime pie.
I missed, when I was in Miami, we bought a bottle of Pinnacle vodka. It's a French vodka. They have this super weird kind of different tasting vodkas, and I bought key lime pie whipped cream. And that fucking vodka is, I was never able to decide if it is really gross or really good.
Yeah.
And the bottle is empty now. And since then I tried to get my hand on another one. And first of all, they don't sell Pinnacle vodka here in Europe, even though it's a French vodka. It's mostly going to Canada and the United States and so on. I think
we have it here.
Asia.
I've only seen the key lime one in, believe it or not, in, was it St. Thomas? I want to say St. Thomas. It was one of the Virgin Islands, and there was like a Pinnacle tasting thing outside a liquor store, like on the main drag, and I had the key lime, and it was really nice.
So if any of you ever find a bottle of key lime whipped cream, contact me.
Yeah.
Please.
I'm going to find
What's
you
your
one
something good?
when I come over. You know what mine's going to be is, so we went to Key West before we took a cruise, and it was our first cruise. It was my second cruise, Paul's first. But we were going to leave that morning and head up, and we kept talking to people that we met, around the hotel or in restaurants, whatever, and they all scared us. They were like, "Oh, you better leave early, because if there's just a fender bender, you could end up in 3 hours of traffic, right? Because it's one road down, one road back. Yeah. So if something happens and there's a traffic backup, it really snarls things up." So they had me in an absolute panic. So I said to Paul, "All right, we're not going to get up at 8. We're going to get up at 4. And we did. So we were up at 4. We got packed. We had an early breakfast. But the great thing was we were driving back toward Miami across 7 Mile Bridge during the sunrise. And it was just so beautiful. Yeah. And we really lucked out, because when we flew from Orlando down to Miami and rented a car. And I had just rented like whatever the cheapest, thing was. And they upgraded us to a convertible. So it was really nice. Yeah, it's just beautiful. Love, love, love Key West. Please do leave us a rating or review if you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes. We would be so grateful. Patreon.com. You search for Fresh Hell Podcast. You'll find us in our bizarre, I don't know what there's just an interesting curated collection for you.
It's a cabinet. It's a cabinet. That's the perfect description. It's like these little weird stores where you find things that don't match together, but somehow it all makes sense in the bigger picture. And it just did a reading of this very weird article about necropsy last week. So that's on there. Game night will be on 27th of August, I think.
Yep. Saturday.
Yep. Let's see if more people can play. It's always a little bit difficult to find times where most people can join us.
I know. We're really lucky because we have listeners from all over the world, and of course we're in different time zones, but yeah, hopefully everybody gets a chance to play.
Go to our webpage, freshhellpodcast.com. There you'll find links to our merch store. You know, winter is coming and you need like a premium quality hoodie.
Those hoodies are so comfy.
Or a mug for your tea.
Honestly.
Also links to our Instagram, to our email, to our P.O. box if you want to send me a bottle of Pinnacle key lime whipped cream. Also, come join our Facebook group. It's the best group there. We are still there. We have still not been, sucked.
We haven't been sucked yet, yeah.
Yeah. And that's it. Say hi to your pets, the parrots, the wallabies, the iguanas, all the creepy crawlies I don't want to mention, the dogs, the cats, the guinea pigs. All of them. They're the best pets. Please take care of them. You're the only thing they have.
That's right.
Be kind to your fellow human being. Be also kind to yourself, because that's the hardest part.
It is. Yeah. And as always, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.